morning, good afternoon, good evening. I am Paul Sisler, and this is In the Moment. How is everyone today? The Vellum with T-Paw. T-Paw, how are you doing today, brother?
Doing pretty good overall. Been doing a lot of running around today with the kiddos. Well, the kiddos were at school, but like running around trying to clean the place up and take care of things, catch up on my cleaning. Halloween hit us hard because of the fact that kids got all a bunch of candy with the trick or treating, and then they just eat their candy when they get off school, and then they leave everything everywhere. So, and it's been like little doses every day.
So did you get in on that tricking your children in the morning and all that, saying you ate all their candy? Did you? Are you one of those parents?
Yeah, actually, I was. I did a little bit of that in the morning, and then I did a little bit of that, later, like last night, at little dosages, so that they don't notice that I'm taking the candy. That way, like, there's no heartaches, there's no, throwing of fits, because Cass is calculated. Cass is my middle child. He'll be like, somebody touched my candy. So I'm all like, this here, and then later on the next day, this here. That way he doesn't notice anything.
Yeah, there's one of the late night talk show hosts that I don't know if it's, I think it's Stephen Colbert. It could be Kimball, could be, I don't know. My stepson watches all the late night talk shows, and people sent in the videos of the children's reaction in the morning, saying that the parents saying that they ate their candy, and it's just like, oh my god, it was so funny. Anyways, all right, so let's welcome our guest today. Hello, Luke. How are you?
Hi, I am hyper. I have been busy all day. I have had way too much caffeine, and TPA is like, holy shit, that was a lot of energy.
that was jazz hands.
If it's scary, I love it.
All right. Yeah. So, what is the topic of discussion today between the two of you?
I will let T-Paw introduce it as the host.
Yeah. So basically, today I wanted to talk to Luke about character and what drives the story. But beyond that, I want to talk about villains. I want to talk about the thing that causes everybody to like have a villain in their story, and then what motivates the villain, and then of course juxtapose that a bit with narration and like who the protagonist, who the antagonist. But then let's say you have a story where there is no protagonist, where it's just moving pieces within the story. The narrator has more control of it rather than being passive, because a lot of times in stories the narrator is passive, the narrator is in the background, and you'll occasionally get commentary here and there, and that is outside of the character's head, but it's like so in the background that as a reader you don't notice it unless you do. So that's something, a couple things we want to talk about today is what drives your story, what drives anyone's story, what drives the stories we're writing today, especially the villain.
Anything writing related immediately makes me word vomit. So if you guys want to word in edgewise at any point, you guys have the mute buttons. I'm sure of it. So just mute my ass, and then I'll just be like in the background. But I am all about character-driven stories. Plot's great, but a plot is only as good as your characters. And for me, I even think that the world building is only as good as your characters, because what we're going to relate to at the end of the day is the characters, because we're seeing ourselves in them. We either love them or hate them because we're relating them to something that's happening in our life or people that we've met, things like that. So if you have really strong characters that feel real to the reader, that's going to make your story, in my opinion. I know some people don't like character-driven, but I love character-driven stories. And a lot of people I've talked to in my groups say that it's the characters for them. But yeah, I'm excited about this topic. This is going to be great.
Yes, absolutely. I myself, I know that people will tell me I'm a plotter. I'm really not. I'm really the guy that just kind of goes, okay, in this general scenario, this is happening, but then we're going to add this little thing that either seems completely related to it or unrelated completely. So it's kind of like taking a Stephen King approach, but like different. And then let's just take a bomb that is their trauma, or that is like an inciting incident, or that is, something spicy, that throw it into the thing and then watch it blow up and let's see what the character does. And like half the time, also there, and I'll be plotting, right? I'll write down, there's a lot of plot, is this happened and that happened, and I'll write down like Trinity does this, these external characters are doing this, this is what's in the story, or at least what's supposed to happen in the story. And then what will happen is I'll hand the wheel to Trinity, right? Like it's kind of like playing with role play and being DM. Is I'll hand the controller to Trinity, being like, okay, you're the character, you're narrating. What is your story? Let me narrate for you. Like I'm just, typing the story. And then I'll sit there and I'll throw a plot at her, and then she just goes that way. And she decides to like do something completely different, and suddenly we're like somewhere else, and I'm like, how? No, by the time I get to the end of like the scene or like the chapter, I go, oh, that was awesome, this happened, and that was crazy and weird. Wait, how the fuck did we get there?
I understand that completely. Like, I know a lot of authors say that, like, I tried to make my character do this, but they took on a mind of their own and they did that. And some people that I've seen, like YouTube creators who offer writing tips and advice. One of my favorites is Jenna Maressi. She kind of throws a little bit of shade on that. She's like, guys, no, like your characters aren't taking on minds of their own. You're just lazy writers or whatever. She kind of said something like that, to that effect. But I love Jenna. Don't get me wrong. She's awesome. But I disagreed with that because I understand where that actually comes from. Because see, I just got done outlining like the first act of my book, of the sequel to the Rimroll trilogy. And I have it all planned out. I was like, this is what's going to happen, exactly how like what conversations are going to have in each scene. Like I knew what was going to happen. And then I got in there and I started like writing from the character's perspectives. I was like, Miles has severe anger issues. Like that he's gone to anger management for like the past like 5 years or whatever. So he's not going to react the way that I need him to react for this conversation to take place. He's about to fucking throw himself on this guy and like just have to like stop himself before he commits a felony. I already know that's what, and I didn't remember that until I was in my character's head again. And I was like, shit. So now like I'm like moving some stuff around, and like adjusting. Yep. Like the main plot is still going to be followed, but I'm going to have to get there a different way because that's what my character will do. And I think that comes down to our accolades. Like we get our attaboy there because our characters are so real to us. We've created them in such a way and can envision them so clearly that they can't behave a certain way. Like they have strong characters, so we can't force them to do this thing that we need them to do for plot because it doesn't match their character. So I think that is a gold star to us for how strong that we've created our characters and how much time and effort we put into them and how well we can envision them.
Exactly. The thing I want to ask you is when you're writing RimWorld, a lot of my process behind my writing, especially when that scene I read out to you guys in the space where Trinity's in the bathtub. Yes. I told you guys that the two things that I had in my head was emulate Elm Street without copying it, without like ripping from it, borrow the detail that she's in the tub, borrow the detail that she has the villain attack her in some way, and then maybe let's spice it up by having some creature attack her in some way. And then that was it. That was all that was in my head. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, Trinity's going, she's taking the bath. She's a young lady, so she's getting lost in her head. That she's, absorbing the water and stuff like that. She's trying to like become warm and stuff. And then she starts falling asleep. And then like that played that Elm Street moment and again where like she's trying to stay awake. And then I know where the squid comes at her and attacks her. And then she goes to go behead Abraxan because he's in the dream world. She's in the dream world. And the funny thing is that this whole process that I'm getting at is that I vibe write. I'll write the vibe of the story based on what the character is. And so if Trinity's terrified or afraid, the vibe is fear, or the vibe is, that emotion. Or I'll tie in like a second, like an opposite emotion. Like, let's say she's afraid. Well, if her friends show up, let's tie happiness now into there, because then they're not all just sitting there chattering their teeth. they're trying to be happy, which is colliding with fear, and therefore it leads to a spicier element of the story. Do you do something like that with your story, where like you'll be writing a scene with a character, and you'll write off the emotion of the character, and you go with the vibe of the story rather than plotting it? Because plotting is just simply, this happened, we went to the store, we rented a movie, we went to go get a drink, we came home. That's literally the plot. Whereas for me, like, writing a story is about figuring out who the character is and what makes you like them or dislike them, whatever, and figuring out what you're trying to say with that particular part of the story. And so, do you vibe right?
Yes, exactly. What I think of when I think of an outline is a to-do list, basically. This is the things that I have to check off for my characters to get from point A to point B to the conclusion. So, like, I have that basic, that's the bones of the story. They don't mean much without, putting flesh on the bones and giving them a personality and all of that. So when I write the outline, that's just my to-do list. And then when I'm actually drafting, that's all about the emotion, the bringing us in close on like their little tics that they might have, or their preferences, things like that, making them real to the reader and bringing in all those five senses. That's what's most important in drafting. And so I do vibe right. And it was so cool how you said about the you juxtapose. Listen, this word is the bane of my existence. I have never heard a writer be able to pronounce that correctly the first go. Like, I just have to,
Juxtapose.
Juxtaposed. There we go. We got it. Show off. Juxtaposed. Anyway, though, the two different emotions, where it was like, look at Mara laughing at me, but you went with happiness, cheery, like, joking around, and then the fear right next to it. And I do the same thing in Lucid, if you'll notice in some of the places, because like there's a lot of trauma. I call myself a trauma genre writer. Trauma genre writer. That's a mouth-fucking fool. Mm-hmm. But anyway, because like I like dealing with like the deeper issues. I like, it's not so much about the trauma, it's the healing after that I'm really obsessed with, because writing is an outlet for me. So whenever like we're going through all the dark stuff and everything like that, I always have like a character come in here that's like joking around. Like Miles is one of the characters that breaks the tension. Laurel's another character that breaks the tension, even though he's a love-hate character. But I do that because if it's just doom and gloom all the time, it just depresses the reader. And they're like, oh my God. Like my readers still say, Julian can't fucking catch a break. What the fuck? I feel so bad for him. But they can still get through the book because there's still those lighthearted moments that's happening at the same time, to where they're not just bogged down with this cloud of darkness the entire book. So I love that you do that as well.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I wanted to talk to you about real quick, because like when it comes to villains and building a villain, which is the centerpiece of the discussion, I will vibrate even my villains. I'll vibrate Abraxan. What does Abraxan feel in this scene? Like, what is he thinking while these teenagers are trying to rise up against him? Like, is he just a cartoon villain who has no dimension? Or, what is the thing that's behind the surface? Like, after he's terrorizing them and after he's scaring them, is he just a guy like Freddy Krueger, the inspiration behind Abraxan? Is he just a guy with the hat and the claws, and he just say funny one-liners? Or does he like show up and have like actual dimension to himself? Does he have struggles? Does he have rivalries? Things like that. And so, for me, like, I put in like Peter's grandfather is the devil, essentially. He's Beelzebub. And with Beelzebub, he's a grandfather. So a lot of times I have to write relationships for me. Like, can't just write character is boy who's teenager who wants to be a prince, or he's a prince who inherited that, but now he's going to go off on an adventure. Instead, what I do is I go, in this scene we have the father and the son, and they're having a bond moment, and then in the middle of that, this demon character who happens to be related to Peter in some way, because they're both, they both have demonic nature to them. Essentially now it's a family story. Braxton's a big bad guy, but he's really related to family and to Peter in familial sense, because of the fact that not only is he related to Orion, which is one of Peter's best friends, but he's also related to Peter in some way. And they have, because Braxton's a villain, he's also a mirror. He's a foil. Peter is a foil of Abraxan because he represents the light or the heroic sense, whereas Abraxan is the monster. Abraxan is the monster of the story, if you will. And so a lot of times, like yourself and other people who love Abraxan, they love the chaotic nature that Abraxan brings to the story. But really, that's just me having fun with them and being like, I wonder what would happen if Abraxan did this or if Abraxan did that. And Abraxan goes, bitch, I would do it this way. Or I would do it that way. Let's go do it. Let's go terrorize some peoples. And then you find out that he, at the root of it all, he wants to create, much like the fourth wall break me. I'm the fourth wall. He wants to create much like them, or he wants to create much like, celestial beings who can create. And so, he's got that going for him, which kind of gives him more depth. Do you do the same thing with your villains?
First of all, I love Abraxan from what you read in the space earlier. I already told you, I felt like Abraxan had a very strong personality right off the gate. Like, we didn't see his mind at all. And it was a horror scene. Yeah. But I got his sarcastic kind of, personality in that short scene that you read about with her in the bathtub, and just like his mannerisms and things like that. You did a great job of portraying his character in that scene, just with action alone. And I loved that. Like, Abraxan is, yeah, I do love Abraxan. But yes, I believe in spending as much time on your villains as you do your main character. I think that's really important because a two-dimensional paper person villain is going to really negatively impact your story, because just as good as your protagonist is and how much personality you've given them and how much depth of character and making them as real as possible to the reader that they are, and how cool they are with their abilities and their growth and their character arcs. I think the same thing has to be applied to the villain, or else it's like a really uneven, unbalanced fight. It's like,
oh, did we lose you, Luke?
Okay, the villain's just, we can. I'm sorry.
Oh, you're going a little static. That's all.
Yeah, you rugged a little.
No.
That's all right.
But yeah, so I put a lot of effort into my villain as well. It's also the reason why, like in Lucid, we don't see the villain Titus very often.
Okay.
He just shows up like a couple of times, and there's a reason why I don't make like the big scenes at the end. I'm not going to give anything away in Lucid, but there's a reason why there's not.
You have sequels. You have sequels. You have plenty of time to really show who this guy is, this person is.
And that's what all of book 2 is we get in deep with the villains. We get into bed with them. We get into their heads and their points of view and things like that. And what I love to do with villains is show, I like to show why they think that they're right, to the point that the reader starts to kind of question it as well. Like, maybe this person isn't so bad, or not even that, not even maybe this person isn't so bad. It's more like, I can understand how they got there. Their takes are still fucking bad. And like, I can't excuse this, or this, but at the same time, this could have been my uncle, like this could have been like, anybody in my family, or like a friend that I used to hang out with that I don't hang out with anymore because their views are so bad. Like, that's what I want to do with my villains. So all of my villains think that they're right, and they have their own justifications for what they do. And I think that makes the best villains, obviously, or else I wouldn't be writing my villains that way, right?
Yes. And the most important thing is we don't even see them as the villain, right? Like, we see them as this animated character who does chaotic things and happens to antagonize our hero. And that's why they're known as the villain, is because they're in opposition of the hero. In any other sense, we would be having so much fun writing about, and we were having fun already writing about how they're, going against this hero character. But at the end of the day, if they were to, like, let's say they entered into the story and suddenly they weren't the villain of the story anymore, like that wouldn't make them boring. it would make it just more entertaining because then suddenly they're sharing the same stage in a different sense with our hero.
Right.
I can't wait until I haven't read TJ for TPA yet, and
Ooh.
I need to read TJ after the show. I'm going to read TJ, my first chapter of TJ, because TJ is presented as the villain, and the good guys. Oh, the presentation is that the good guys are the good guys and the villain is the villain, when the reality is it's the opposite. And the things that are characterized in it, I mean, you're already on the fence at the beginning. It's just like, I love TJ, but he's evil, but I love him, but he's evil. Something new, something different. And I
like
guarantee you'll like it.
There's a line I wrote for Braxton in one of the because Braxton is the only villain. Like, obviously, I've got other characters who are antagonistic in nature to our heroes. Like, I've got Murdrin, which is a Thanos-like character. He's not an eco-terrorist, but like he definitely wants to control the world in his own way. And then you've got Mindcrypt, and then you've got more normal named character Alex. Alex is Sam's grandmother. But you've got quite a few different characters who are antagonistic sense to our heroes. But yet, if you were inside their head and you were watching them narrate, you'd be like, "You're making perfect sense right now. Why do I hate you?"
That's exactly what I'm planning on doing with Insomnia. Yes, it's where like we're in their heads and they just seem like normal people. When you're with them, you're like, shit, hold up a minute. Yeah.
Yep.
We have the same idea about that.
Yeah, no, I was having a lot of fun when I was writing. There was scenes in the Omnibus Crimson Nightfall that I wrote like years ago, and there was a scene where I got to have a lot of fun with it because I told Amber, I was like, I'm writing the scene, I'm writing the scene. And she's like, what scene? And I'm like, I described it to her, and she was like, that's gonna be interesting. And I'm like, why? And she's like, because for the first time in a long time, and like many chapters and pages, these two characters won't be technically antagonists of each other. Like, they'll be on the same level playing ground for all of 5 seconds before all the chaos starts again. And I'm like, yeah, and I get to explore that different dynamic to the characters.
I think that's a great segue into me asking you, how do you handle character arcs? How do you plot those out, plan those out for your characters? Or do you just kind of like just hope for the best? Like, I know that they're going to start out this way and they're eventually going to end up this way by the end of the book.
That's actually the most I plan. That's actually the most I plan of anything I ever plot out, aside from world building, aside from figuring out what the religions are, what like the currency is going to be, what the map looks like, all that other hard stuff that every writer faces unless you're really good at that. I plot out the character arcs integrally. I am so in tune with how the character art looks that when I get to that point in the story, I go, oh, plot stuff's happening. Well, what's happening with that character? Oh, that character is at that point in their life where this is going to happen, and this is like a very cinematic moment. And I'm like, oh, I know where we are now. Like, I'm so like in tune with like the character's journey in the story that for me, like, yeah, Orion is a fourth wall breaker and a comedian, but he's dealing with parental, like dad stuff. Like, he's dealing with dad problems. And then you got Seamus, who is his middle brother, he's in the background for much of the story. Like, he pops in a few scenes here and there, but he's adopted. So what does that do? Like, what does being adopted mean when, you're watching as your brother and your brother's friend, who is kind of your friend, but more your brother's friend, go off and defeat stuff. But then when the demons that are involved in your friend's life, that are part of his family, come into your family, suddenly tragedy strikes. Like, what does that mean? Like, what does that do for that character? And so, like, with this particular story, one thing I wanted to also go into is, in Sam's point of view, with her story, is dealing with insanity, but from both sides of the family. It's not just her mom's side, it's not just her dad's side. And her grandmother, who is the most insane of them all, thinks that everything that is fairy related is purity. And so she's got her own thing going on. And the characters that I'm going to be really having a lot of fun with is building a world where humans are slaves. And then going into slavery, going into what does that mean? and going into what does that mean for a biracial character who, in this alternate world sense, had to have people as part of their family line deal with that sort of thing, or deal with a version of that sort of thing. And how does that happen? Like, does Sam and Dot, who's one of the humans who deals with this, that's their reality, does she relate to her in that way, or does she relate to her in a different way? And so there's character arcs that are in the story where she has to learn how to have responsibility. She has to learn how to be a person outside of just what everyone's throwing at her. She has to learn certain beats of the story. Like, for instance, in Crimson Nightfall, every character had 4 major character arcs, 4 major ones. There was Sam's, where she was learning what it was like to fail to save someone. So amidst all the chaos, she got to own her own story. Second arc had to do with her dealing with the ramifications of her cousin, Peter, our main character, cousin Peter being a prince, and her and Peter are 2 different sides of the same coin of the world. And what does that do for her? Like, how does she grow as a character in that second arc where she's learning about her identity? And then at each one of the steps, each one of the arcs is like a step in the character growth, to the point where we unify all of the characters' arcs into a single clock-like work. It's like a clock, and it kind of ties into the theme of the story, which is not becoming your own trauma.
Yes, real. I'm sorry, please, Paul. You have barely gotten a word in edgewise. Please go.
For those that aren't writers or have studied literature or writing or development or anything like that, please explain to the audience what an antagonist, a protagonist is. Explain what an arc is. Explain what that means.
In terms of story, antagonist is the person opposing the protagonist. Antagonist is expected to be the villain. Protagonist is expected to be the hero, but protagonist also just simply means you're narrating their life.
Okay.
But you can also be an antagonist and a narrator at the same time, because it's the birth of the villain story.
Right.
And in terms of arcs, they are parts of person's life. So let's say in your birthday party, you had a very dark moment with your mother, and that is a very defining moment of your life. That could be arc 1. Let's say you have something else that happens in the story, and that could be arc 2, like say a failed date. And these are all building up to a story where you learn about love, you learn about why the tragedies happen to you, but the whole time you're questioning why the tragedies happen to you and why me. And it's the identity story of like, how do I become a better person, or do I end up descending into madness because of all this?
Now, how many characters, how many main characters, or essential characters may you have in your story? I know you have your protagonist, your antagonist, and then you have these
I actually have 5 protagonists. I have 5 narrators, actually.
Okay.
In which each one has a different cast.
Right. And
how
many arcs do like your mains have, and then your subs?
They all have the same amount. Technically, you can have what's considered a micro arc, where it's not a full-on arc. It's more of a micro arc. It's like a small piece of the story that ties in, and yet it's so defining that it's the one thing a reader remembers.
All right, there we go. I just wanted to clarify that for the audience. Thank you. Go ahead.
Sorry, I'm like I get. Thank you, Paul, for being the mod here and helping me and Luke kind of have more of a sense of direction as far as like remembering there's an audience.
Yes, no problem.
I do have kind of like a different kind of way that I view character arcs. Not that T-Pause is wrong at all. Like I agree.
Everyone views it differently. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Let's hear it.
The way that I view character arcs is how the character began in the story, and then how they are changed by the end of it, which you basically said that, but I just wanted to spell that out to anyone that's listening. So those events absolutely are what impacts them and makes them to change. It's not the events themselves, it's how they react to those and what they learn from the journey along the way. But that's how I see it. Like they start out this way. So when I do my outlines for character arcs, I go like, okay, so Julian's going to be like this kind of stubborn, untrusting. Well, when he first shows up, he trusts everyone, but then like he's betrayed in the beginning of the book of Lucid, right? So he's betrayed by the only people that he was relying on. He felt like, like he's in a safe place. He's being guided in this strange dream dimension that he's been brought into. And then he starts to realize, oh, okay, now I have to like, be a certain way. I have to like, I have to do whatever this person says now. Jax tells him in order to have my place here. And he starts feeling vulnerable because like he can't defend himself. He doesn't have magic and shit like everybody else in the book does. So we start to see that his core personality at the beginning of the book is him feeling defenseless and not liking that and having to take control of the situation. So he's got like control issues to an extent. And also he dislikes authority, which I do put a lot of myself into my characters. I'm sure you do as well. Like you take from, your personal life and pepper those into your characters. So he has control issues and he dislikes authority. He doesn't like being told what to do. He wants to be his own man. He wants to be in charge of himself and in charge of his own destiny. And as the story progresses and he starts to learn to trust people and realize that not everyone's going to stab him in the back or whatever. And he goes through all of these things that's going to happen in books 2 and in book 3. By the end of book 3, he's going to become a much more refined character, to where he realizes that not everything is so black and white, that it doesn't have to be all or nothing. He stops demanding blind loyalty from the people around him that he considers friends. He starts to see the nuances that's happening in life. And he starts to let go some of that need for control that he has as well. So that's one of his character arcs, one of his overarching ones. That's just an internal kind of thing, the way that he views the world. So I just wanted to share that, not trying to I'm just using my book as an example because you're using yours.
Oh, you're good. You're good. You're good. That's perfect. We have 2 completely different ways of doing the same thing. And that's the thing, is I'm hoping that the people out there are learning from either one of us on ways of telling the story. It's part of why we're having this conversation, is talking about that, because for a while, for years, I honestly was asking myself, not anybody else, nobody else knows the story more than me, of course, but I was asking myself, is Peter's story the birth of a villain? And I was asking myself that because there's a draft out there. I don't remember if it's in my old bedroom and it later got thrown away, or if it's somewhere on a flash drive somewhere, but there's a version of the story where after he gets done with a fight with a rival at his school, he goes through this, basically there's this ritual that happens. And in the ritual, he ends up snapping, going into this trance in which he ends up just killing a bunch of people. And that's the end of the story, is he kills a bunch of people and he doesn't know where his friends are at. He doesn't know where his love interest is at. Doesn't know where anything is. And the story literally ends with him talking to his grandfather about morality and who he is as a person. It's a really intense scene, and that's how it ended the story. That was one of the original endings for one of the stories I was writing, and it was is this the birth of a villain story, or am I trying to make him a hero?
Okay, all right, I see. That's interesting to bring up birth of a villain, because that kind of happened in Lucid too. I knew it was going to end that way, but I didn't. I can't even. You know what? It's fine.
We have so many similarities, because every time I talk about anything I'm doing, you're like, oh my god, I did this thing too, and I'm like, huh. We're interesting. We're very similar.
It's just interesting how we do kind of the same thing. There's so many similarities, but there's also so many differences. You're doing this dream thing. You have the dream concept as well, a dream world and shit that your characters have to deal with and handle. But yours does it in a Freddy Krueger type way, where it's but there's also fairies in the world and shit like that. There's you went a whole other fucking direction with it. And then mine is just kind of everyone goes into this dream place, it's accessible to everyone. And it's fascinating how 2 different books can come from the same concept from 2 different writers. That's another reason why I don't worry about my ideas being stolen or anything. I'll talk about my ideas all day long, because you can go and write it, but I'm going to write the same damn thing the way that I was writing it before, and it's going to be 2 different books. Like, take my premise, take my
I never
concept.
worry. I never worry about telling you stuff or telling people in the Twitter spaces stuff because I'm just like, dude, if we end up nodding at each other or like being like, hey, you notice this? Like, this little nod or this little thing that you pulled, like that's considered an homage. That's considered, inspiration of some kind. Like, for instance, the whole thing where Trinity's get attacked in the bathroom, that's a straight up nod to Elm Street. And I did it in a completely different way than what they did. Like, and then like you've got like, cause like the part where the hand comes up, and remember how in the story, you guys were both there, when it comes up, the hand actually flips her off. Whereas in the original story, the hand just simply does this. It just comes up like this and between her legs, and then it goes away. It goes back in the water. Whereas in my story, it's like Braxton's like, "Fuck you."
Yes.
And so there's this interesting synergy of like ideas and stuff. And if you were to mesh Game of Thrones with Star Wars, a little bit of Harry Potter, some Sandman, and then like a bit of Rings and some other stories, and you threw it into a cocaine blender and then threw a pot of dynamite into it, you'd get Shadowfang. You'd get my stories.
Well, everything that everybody writes comes a little bit from some story somewhere, I mean.
I have no shame about saying that because I have honestly been like, sit there and been like, okay, so that one movie and the one scene that I really loved, and Amber would be like, yeah, I'm like, okay, I'm gonna do a version of that. She's like, okay, and I'm like, and it's gonna be on crack. She's just like, oh, why do you keep saying it's on a crack? And I'm like, because everyone that ever reads anything I write is always saying it's so out there and it's so weird and so demented or weird or different. And I go, okay, then I guess it's that thing, but it's on crack.
TPA, let me ask you this. I know everyone calls you T-Paw, but I have a thing for acronyms, so whatever. But do you purposely like twist your shit? Yes. Let me explain. Because like I get told that like my shit's wild too, just like you do. But the reason why I think that my shit comes off as so twisty is because I'll get the initial idea and I'll be like, that's basic. And then like I'll take elements and I'll change it and be like, well, what if instead of this happened? And like it'll offshoot and become so different and twisted from what like the original idea was that everyone's like, how do you come up with that idea? Because I sat and I thought about the original idea for so long that it fucking mutated into this fucked up thing.
Yes. And then you stab it with emotions called a knife, and you twist the knife, and you go, okay, now we're all sad again.
Cocaine blender. Marinara.
Cocaine blender.
I love the cocaine blender. Yes.
Better than the one joke I cracked the last podcast with Cornelia, where I talked about a certain movie called Teeth.
Oh, is that the one with the vagina?
Yeah,
I remember.
Teeth. I kept making the jokes about vaginas with teeth, and friggin' now I'm just like, cocaine blender. Let's make it more tame.
That's sad when that's the more tame thing. Okay, but focusing back on characters.
Yes.
Okay, so we kind of covered like villains, how we create villains, how we create our protagonists. How do you develop your relationships between the characters? I'll let you talk first, and then I'll tell you mine.
Okay, so with my relationship with characters, I basically what I do is I stick them in real situations. I go, okay, well, have you ever had a brother? I've had a brother. Have you ever had a sister or a sibling of any kind? Because not everybody has brothers and sisters. Some people just have one or the other, or have one that wants to be both. Everyone has identity. But like, what I do is I take and I think, well, even if someone has never had a mom or never had a dad, you could still have a familial relationship that leans either way. And so if you have someone in your life that has played a paternal role, then you can think back to interactions with those characters and you could be like, okay, I'm going to play on that in this scene because that is a paternal role and that is a paternal part of the story. And everyone has had a version of that in their life. And if they haven't, imagine it. Like, imagine what it would be like to have a dad or have a mom. And imagine making mistakes along the way and then having the knife get twisted because in families, that family's fucked up. Like have it to where in those relationships that you're trying to have with people, like bad shit happens. If it didn't, then the story wouldn't exist. And so, like, figure out a way to create bonding moments, like where they're out at a game or they're out sparring. Like, for instance, my aunt was like, well, why doesn't the dad and the son ever interact? I'm like, they do in the dinner scene, and a few of the in dinner is technically an intimate human relationship activity thing. So I had them interact at dinner. And she's like, well, you should have them do something else. I'm like, okay, I'll add a scene where they're sparring because they're vampires. She was like, well, you have them go fishing. And I'm like, try to imagine vampires becoming not bored while fishing. Not gonna work. Let's have them spar. And so, like, I was like, they're two. He's a monarch. He's a king. His son's a prince. He's trying to groom him into becoming a prince. So, what do vampires in kingdoms do? They tend to spar. They get ready for conflict or for a fight. And since there's going to be a lot of fighting in the story, it would make sense if they sparred. And so I went ahead and did that. And I was like, the two brothers would show off in front of the dad. The dad would drop some, wisdom, and then like maybe chide one of the brothers for being too impulsive. And there you go. You have a very intimate, story scene where you have your dad, and then you have your two boys who are brothers. You have your siblings, and you have your paternal parents, and you have that type of thing. And I apply that to everyone. Like, let's say I'm in a scene where it's dark, where a nightmare just happened, and you have to care. So it's not just, two characters are scared and terrified. I guess I'm terrified too. Instead, it's, well, what if the mom dealt with the exact same traumatic experience the daughter did? Let's have them interact together and bond over pain. And let's have them deal with the fallout and the post of what that means. Like, where do you go from there? Like, that's kind of what I do with my relationships, is I put in real scenarios or real situations that everyone has experienced in their life. And then I take a bit of my own reality, a bit of what I've experienced as a person, and then just sprinkle that in without basing it. Because like people in my real life are like, this is based on this, isn't it? And I'm like, no, not really. It's a nod. Like there's some nod in there. There's like elements of what happened. But if I were to do that exact copy and paste, that the characters wouldn't exist. So like I take like a sprinkle of that moment that was in my life, and then I put it into the fiction fantasy where the two characters who are completely different people have their own interaction, and they bond as people. They bond as because I have vampires and werewolves, but I don't treat them like vampires and werewolves. I treat them like people who happen to have vampire supernatural stuff, or werewolf supernatural stuff. Werewolves are a bit more clan driven and COVID, and stuff like that. Vampires are clan driven, yes, but they're different because they're not wolves. Werewolves are essentially man cubs, man wolves. And so what would you do if you have man's best friend and man in the same body? Well, there you go. There's a werewolf, and they're very clan driven. They're very, they like, for instance, Orion, often drawn by my wife with ears on top of his head, because he is essentially a werewolf, and he has 2 ears on top of his head. He has his tail, and he likes playing guitar, and he likes smoking weed. Like that's he's an interesting character. He's a fourth wall breaker. I mean, I was smoking like with my brother years and years ago, and I was like, what would happen if we took Deadpool but made him a werewolf, fourth wall breaker, and he just happened to be high a lot? And my brother's like, no, you're just high right now. And I'm like, no, what if I did that to a fictional character? He's like, I don't know. And I'm like, and make it like Clerks from Convenience Store, where him and his brother are bantering back and forth in front of customers, and it happens to be a weed store, but it's a convenience store. So there's like, products, there's milk that's like convenience, there's milk, eggs, meat, stuff people can eat. And then you throw in a hotel into the mix. So upstairs people can go to sleep if they want, and then downstairs it's like a shop, but it's like a weird little hybrid thing, and that's Orion. So and then I like explore, having brother familial relationship with his brother, explore moments where like because dad walked off and ran off, but then came back. I'm exploring what happens when your werewolf cub kid has daddy issues, and then exploring what happens when the dad and the mom have issues. But I've talked for a long time now, so I'm going to let Luke now take a turn.
Oh no,
I
I'm good.
apologize.
I was enjoying. I was just listening and enjoying what you were talking about.
Well, I have a comment because
Yes, go
my
ahead, Paul.
characters are basically forced bonding. Okay, where like in Blood Schism, where Iris is basically taken out of her element and forced into another situation, and now she has to rely on her kidnapper to team up with her. So it's like a forced trust that now you have no one else, and this is the circumstance. So now they're going to learn about each other, and of course this is what's going to change one of the characters view on things, well, both characters, their views on things. So that forced bonding is what's going to do it. And then in TJ, again, he's now orphaned and he's put into a new situation. So again, forced bonding. He's got no choice but to bond with the people that he's with. Same
Deal with
thing,
the fallout.
right? So same thing with Breathe and all that. Her father is basically terminated, murdered, and they give her a new father, and now she's got to learn from that. So again, forced bonding. And even in the new one that I started writing, Wallpaper, the lives of the two main characters that are going to get turned upside down. The outside source is who brought them together and made them fall in love. So it wasn't even on their own volition that they fell in love. Somebody else made it to where that would happen. So, yeah. So I kind of do like a forced bonding of these characters.
You call it forced. I call it opportunistic.
I call it forced proximity because, like, they do bond, absolutely, but they bond because they're forced to be in each other's company.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's like real life.
Yes.
Especially when you go to like a Thanksgiving party with all your, extended family members, and you showed up because you were invited or because there's food being promised, and then out of nowhere you end up in conversations with relatives you haven't heard from in months or weeks, and they're like, "So how's that job you have? How's that thing you have?" Like they're asking you questions that you're like, "My buddy and I talk every day. We never ask each other about this shit." And like that, and they're taking interest in the most menial bullshit just to try and feel like they have a bond or something. And like it just kind of reminded me of that a little bit. It's kind of funny. My question to you guys both is, do you guys, or are you guys going to have scenes where the villains are having tea, or the villains are at a bar or something, and they're just like drinking together, and they're like bonding over the fact that they are either just regular random people, or the fact that they've antagonized their hero enough, or maybe like have like the villains club, like on that one cartoon series How It Should Have Ended, where like they have like the Emperor Palpatine and all the villains are all together hanging out at the bar. Just like random scenes where like they're all together, and then like have like your hero in the middle of it all, and like seeing them all bonding together, and suddenly you're like, am I the hero or are they the hero?
No, I do have I have a restaurant scene with Iris and Donovan, and there's a bonding that's going to come out there based upon the service that they receive at the restaurant. And Iris getting upset because Donovan doesn't tip. So I'm going to have a whole conversation on tipping just between the two of them. So, yes, I am going to have that. I don't know if I'll have something like that in Breathe or not. I'm not that far enough into that world. With TJ, oh yes, there's going to be a lot of public bonding situations. So
public intoxication of like, we're drunk, yay, take off your clothes.
Probably not so much the drinking aspect. TJ is still a kid. Maybe when he gets to adulthood, I might do that. But right now, it's like places where they dine, where they have a meal. So that's kind of where I'm at.
I've had my Sam the teenager, because of the fact that it's a different world than our own. I've had it to where Sam the teenager, without her mom's permission, will go to the tavern or go to the bar, and she'll get drunk. because it's her way of dealing with her trauma. Like I've had the scenes like that. My wife's like, "Did you really just have a teenager get drunk?" And I'm like, "Yeah." Have you ever been a teenager and been drunk? And she's like, "Yeah." And I'm like, "Okay then." And I'm just like, I've had it. I mean, I've done that. Like, and that's what like I actually have been given props from like fellow teenagers or fellow young adults who've read anything that I've done and been like, "You totally just had them do this thing, didn't you?" And I'm like, "Yes." And they're like, "Dude, I don't know if this is a kid's book." I'm like, "It's not a kid's book. It's a book that it just happens to be dark fantasy and have, realistic situations happening to people. Like it's not like cartoon. Like the funny thing is that Orion and then Ares, my talking hellhound, because yes, my hellhounds talk. Um, Ares, the dragons that talk, the Hellcats, they're the most cartoonish aspects of the world. And then now I've got a talking sword. So like I just happen to like putting in like little cartoonish things or things that are zany and out there that like you'd be like, wait, didn't we just watch this dark thing happen? It's like, yep. And now this thing's happening? Yep. It's like,
so this is going to be a future anime, right?
I've been told that. I've been told like this could be an anime, and I'm like, really could be, couldn't it? I mean, it can't be as bad as like watching The Sandman. I was watching The Sandman on Netflix, and there's an episode where they go to the serial convention, and one of the characters, that's the future Vortex, her brother goes to the con with the person they're with, and when they go to the serial killer convention, because it's a serial killer convention, he hears cereal, so he thinks there's actually cereal there because he's a boy, he's a little boy, and so he keeps asking where all the cereal is, and like it's a con convention where all the serial killers who all have nicknames go to gather to go talk about their kills or what drives them to do what they do, and it's like one of the darkest aspects of Sandman, and I'm like watching this and I'm like, they totally did that, didn't he? He made a Comic-Con for serial killers.
Brilliant.
Yes.
Now,
No, I love. Yeah, it's
series.
the Sandman. It's a adaptation of the comic book Sandman by Neil Gaiman.
Okay, I'll have to check it out.
I love Sandman. They got renewed for second season finally.
Oh, nice. I'll have to check it out.
Absolutely. Hey, Luke, what you up to there?
I am actually writing down like a bunch of ideas about how to create characters actually for possibly a blog post that I might do later. Because you two were, on a roll. I didn't want to interrupt you or anything, but yeah,
you're good. We had asked you like what your answer was for the whole thing about the characters and the situations and the relationships. Yes.
I was actually just writing that down, actually.
You're like, fuck this video. I'll just blog about it.
Well, no, like I want to interact as well. I just I didn't want to interrupt you guys because like you guys had some really good points going on, and I didn't want to like interject. But yes, for me, like I feel like all the characters in your story should have a strong personality. Period. So it comes back to it's kind of like acting, you know what I mean? Like even the character, like the mom of the MC that maybe only appears like twice in the whole book for just like short scenes. I feel like she should still be developed, because if an actor, like a really good actor, like Angelina Jolie, for example, one of the big names, played off of somebody who was like an amateur who had never acted a day in their life, and maybe just did improv once a month or something at like a club or whatever. If she played off of that character, she would be carrying the whole thing, and you would definitely be able to notice that the other actor didn't know what the fuck they were doing and was just doing their best, but they didn't have as much skill and as much experience as the big name author. So you don't want that to show through in your writing. So you want all the characters to be at the same skill level, the same development. That way your main character isn't playing off of some amateur, some paper person, because that kind of, I feel like that fucks up the flow. You know what I mean? So, and
it shows.
it makes it richer if everybody has a really strong personality, and every character, no matter how small, has their own rich background. Even if you don't mention it in the book and it, that's still going to show through in your writing. So that's my thoughts on character interactions. And I feel like because of that, their interactions become more real when I'm writing them. Like if I know who all the characters are and all their personalities and everything that they've been through in life, then when one character talks to another character, I don't have to sit there and wonder like, oh, what's this person going to say back or whatever. And it also it just tells me right off, like I hear all the dialogue clearly in my head because I am this person and I am that person and I am that person, so this entire conversation moves very smoothly. And they sometimes create plots on their own when you do that, when you create all your characters a certain way, and develop them all properly, then sometimes they'll be in a conversation and you'll realize because of their conversation that they're having that the plot's going to have to go a different way. Like not the entire plot, but but something's going to change. Like an element that you thought that you were going to be able to put in there is not going to work anymore, and you're going to have to find another way to get to the next plot point because these characters just gave you an idea just from them talking to each other in this scene. I don't know. Does that make any sense?
Yes, it makes perfect sense to me. And one thing I wanted to follow up with that with is what are some of your favorite moments in your stories with any of the characters who are antagonists? And what are your favorite moments from them?
Well, in the book 2 is where the antagonists are kind of going to get together, like have that drink at the bar or whatever. Because Titus is the obvious main villain character, but in book 2, the gates of chaos have fallen because of something that happened in book 1, and we're still trying to figure that out in the beginning of book 1 right now. 10,000 words so far in the draft. Yay.
Yay.
But anyway, since the gates have fallen, then it's also let out somebody named Frederick Valier out of a pocket realm of chaos called Nodia Stera. And when he gets out, and all of the gates are kind of like deteriorating. It's actually breaking down the fabric of the universe, so that we've got to figure out how to fucking fix that before it all dies and kills everybody. But Frederick Valier and his posse, Merrick, Sam, and Lamouth, those are like his demon people that like helped him found his cult on Earth when he was still alive, which is still in effect today. Those 4 are kind of like new villains that pop up with Titus, and those 2 are like in cahoots together. Like they're not like friends, but like they were friends way back when, and now they're reacquainting with each other. And then I have another villain that's popping up, and I'm calling her Xanaru, and she's popped up, and nobody knows like where she comes from or anything like that at first. But Titus kind of has an idea of who she is exactly, and that whole group there is kind of getting together and like rubbing elbows, and if they all join together, it's going to be really fucking bad. So wish them luck. But that's kind of like the thing that's happening there. It's Frederick and Titus are the 2 main villain characters that are rubbing elbows right now, and kind of like exchanging what they hate about the protagonist of the story right now. And I haven't gotten to the part where they actually start discussing who do we hate, but it's up, and I'm excited about it.
Nice. Yeah, some of the things that I like most about a villain, and I'll ask Paul actually what his favorite moments are as well. But first, before I go into that, one of my favorite things to do with a villain is not make them a villain. It's to figure out who they are as people and figure out what they want to do and figure out, what their motivations are, what do they fear, what do they like. Because oftentimes this person is the person I'm giving the best lines to anyway. So you don't want to give them the best lines and then have it be a complete waste of time and waste opportunity because of the fact that the character was an Etch-a-Sketch or character was a 2-dimensional piece of paper. Instead, you want them to be a very dynamic sense of person, and you want to feel like they deserve it whenever they have powers. Like, for instance, when a Braxton can bend the universe to his will inside the dream state and can, like, make, squid characters or squid, creatures from Lovecraftian depths of the demonium pop up out of the wall and antagonize this teenage girl. Like, you want him to be able to earn that right, to be able to have the right to do that. And then you want, Murdrin, who very, very Thanos like, with, having some of his own best lines. And, like, have all these little characters that are very much cartoon characters, but at the same time, like, they're scary and terrifying in their own way because of the fact that they are villains. But if, like, you were to remove the idea of villain, you'd be like, oh, so Murdrin's a scientist who's obsessed with the same thing that Peter's Uncle Crush is, which is to create something that can dynamically change the world that they live in and potentially heal things, or to influence, control others. Like, he wants to use medical science as a way to change the world. And then you've got, Abraxan, who wants to learn how to use magic to create, and so he uses curses and things like that to manipulate things, people around him, but more as like a side reaction because he's a chaotic neutral person, to create chaos because people around him were trying to stop him, and so he's like, well, this is my defense mechanism. You try to stop me, bitch, so welcome to my world. And then, like, you've got like all these other little characters that have like their own little things, and like being able to give them normal moments too. Like, let's say Peter and those guys are at the joint, and they're, at the convenience store, and they're at the bar part of the joint, and they're all having like a drink together and whatever, and Braxton shows up out of nowhere, and they're like, where'd you come from? And he's just like, I'm here and I want to talk to you guys real quick. And then then he looks for the most innocent looking thing in the room. He grabs a cheeseburger off the bar and starts eating it. And then he grabs a cocktail off the bar and starts drinking it. And he goes, you really need to add this to the cocktail recipe. And they'll be like, wait, where did that come from? He's like, just because I felt like bringing it up. And then he segues that into what his next line is going to be for the story, which is very story driven. But it's a very normal moment for a villain. It makes them more realistic and normal in the sense that it's not world domination, hoo hoo ha ha ha. It's more like, hey, what's up? I just happen to be powerful as fuck. Let me kick your ass first. And then be a villain character. But yeah, go ahead, Paul. You are muted. We cannot hear you.
I'm going to read it to you. This is just after TJ's dad is basically burnt to a crisp. Okay.
Nice.
Tom's face was blistering, his hair gone, his teeth showing as his lips were starting to peel and crack, with wisps of smoke exiting his mouth. TJ could see the fear in his father's eyes, something he had never seen before, something new. He liked it. He smiled. His father tried to raise his arms as if he was going to reach out and grab TJ, but he was just out of reach. He could hear the raspy, forced breaths coming from his father. TJ looked into those now fearful eyes and said, "Good morning, Father. Looks like it's going to be another blistering hot day."
I love that part of the story too. Honestly, TPA, you got to hear this story at some point. If you don't mind, Paul, when I open up the writing sprint space again, after we're done here, if you want to open the space with reading that, I would love to hear it again because I miss it.
Well,
it's been so long.
I could do that, or right after our show here, I could read it to you.
Sure. Yes, that could work too.
Yes.
Yeah,
nice.
I could get some critical feedback from T-Paw here.
Yes, absolutely. I love what you said, TPA, about how basically villains don't villain all the time. I know I'm paraphrasing, but they do. They interact with their friends and their family in a very normal way. It's not all twirling the handlebar mustache and going, I'm evil for the sake of being evil. They really have their own motivations. They're just people like everybody else. If it wasn't a book, it would just be a person with bad takes. And villains, in my opinion, villains are people who didn't learn the lesson from the experiences that they were given. I have characters in my book who have gone through loads of trauma. And what they take from it is, I never want somebody else to hurt like that. so I'm going to behave this way. This is how I'm going to interact with people, and how I view the world. I want to be like the protector for the people, and keep them from feeling that pain or going through that trauma like I did. And then I have the same, the villain do the same thing, have the same trauma attached to them, and their take from it, their takeaway is completely different. It's okay, well, I was hurt, so, and I got over it, so everybody should just get over it, and they should just suck it up or whatever, like that's the two different ways, where one character will take it and go like, okay, well, that just means that you're weak if you can't get through it, because I got through it, I'm fine. And then you got the protagonist, it's like, well, I went through it, and even though I survived, somebody else might not, that's just one example, and so villains are just people with bad takes. They're just people who didn't. I just bit my tongue and it fucking hurt. They're just people who didn't learn the right lesson from their experiences. And that's all I'll say. Ow.
I like how you said that, because that makes me think of the fable lore of the hero's tale, which is the fact that, the hero is trying to get through the hero's tale, the 12-act structure, trying to get through his tale to learn the morality lesson of what, the story's trying to tell him. But the villain themselves failed to learn it, and that's why they became the villain. And so that's part of why they, what led to that journey is being a villain. And you can either have your redemption arc where you learn it properly, or you can go down that sinister path even further and just become even more depraved and insane. And, be fun for the audience to watch until, the person becomes real, and then suddenly everyone's terrified because our world's fucked. And so, it all depends on, where you're going to go with the story. But I liked how you said that, because that really plays into the methodology behind the hero's tale that I tend to fantasize over. Like, as a writer, I can tend to, not slave to it, but use it as a guiding tool to help direct pathways for all these different fictional fake people, and make them real and tell the lie that tells the truth, and create these characters who really are just mirrors of our darker sides, because they're the things that came together, like the threads of thoughts that came together in our heads that became people, and the people are literally just mirrors of our darker natures. And that's what it is. It's like the villain is the person that is like, oh, by the way, this person at one point in time wanted to do the exact same thing the villain did, but they either didn't want to admit it, or they can't do it morally, and so they end up not doing it. And so that this villain really is just a mirrored reflection of the writer. And that's part of why I find it interesting when it comes to Harry Potter, because Voldemort is a pureblood person, or at least he's a half-blood wizard who is all about blood purity, and yet he's a darker reflection of a version of Rowling. Let you steal that one for a minute.
I didn't get it. I'm just going to be honest. I didn't catch that. I didn't understand what you said.
Voldemort is a manic maniac who is terrified of death, right?
Right.
He's he's obsessed with blood purity, and he wants to not die. Mm-hmm. He is a mirrored reflection of some of Rowling's darker natures as a
Rowling.
writer.
Okay. I see. That's why I didn't understand. I didn't hear the Rowling part, because I'm used to pronouncing it Rowling. So when I didn't understand, I was like, "Who the fuck are you talking about?"
So I pronounced the name weirdly, I guess.
No. Some people pronounce it Rowling. I think it's depending on where people are from. Like some people pronounce it Rowling, some people pronounce it Rolling. So it's cool. But yeah, no, I think you're right there. Yeah.
I always thought that Harry Potter was just a imaginary remake of Star Wars.
I've seen memes where they compare it, and I was like, huh.
Maybe Rowling saw Star Wars episode, before it even became episode 4, saw Star Wars and was like, oh, that's a fun story. And then watched Empire, Return of the Jedi. And then a decade and a half later, she's like, my power's out. Let's write a story about a boy wizard instead of a boy Jedi.
Yeah. I mean, when you look at when you compare the two stories, they kind of run hand in hand, But I mean, sometimes, a lot of the things that I write, I take bits and pieces from other stories. That's what gives me ideas. Again, Blood Schism is kind of a combo between True Blood and The Matrix when you break it down. With the prophecy aspect of it, and where Neo is the one. Iris is the one, and True Blood and all that. It's basically you have all these different supernatural people that hate each other, come together, blah blah blah, and that's kind of where I'm at with it. It's and kind of the whole horror fantasy aspect. The sensuality, the sexuality, the camaraderie that's in it and everything. It all goes hand in hand. It's an inspiration to what I'm writing. So but who knows?
It's like you are telling us and the audience that I am correct when I say that most works. I say most because some people will literally just pull it from one thing, but most are mutts of previous betters or previous inspirations.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Paul.
I think everybody gets an inspiration from something else that's out there. It gives them an idea. It sparks, the imagination. Kind of like Breathe is kind of a derivative from Soylent Green. Just the idealism that's behind it. Even though there's not going to be any similarity between the characters or anything like that, it's just a concept. And I think a lot of people get these ideas and they expand upon them. Vampires are old as hell. The writing of vampires, the writing of druids. I'm taking vampires and druids and bringing them together. Again, two ideas that other people have created, and I'm bringing them together and using them in my story.
Yep. Vampires, I actually played a lot with their mythology with my story series because everyone's got their own different version of it, but I figured I would make mine more like an evolution of humanity. Like vampires just happen to be have to have blood as part of their diet, but they're a evolved form of humans. Like humanity and vampires are actually brother creations because, and also vampires are a curse or technically what some of the mythology of vampires in my story are actually a curse brought on by two rivaling gods, because you had two gods from Egyptian mythology that were fighting each other thousands of years before the current story takes place. And the reason why vampires have extreme sun sensitivity is because one of the gods had a sense of humor.
Yeah, and we were talking about Harry Potter and Star Wars.
Yes.
Garo put up, neither is original. Search the monomyth and the hero's journey.
I mean, technically, George Lucas was a pupil of. I'm trying to remember the guy's name. The guy who wrote The Hero's Journey. I think it was Joseph Campbell. Yeah, George Lucas was a massive pupil of Joseph Campbell. When he wrote a lot of A New Hope and wrote Empire and Return, he was obsessed with Joseph Campbell's The Hero's Journey.
Yeah, well, and like I said, things inspire people. I mean, take Led Zeppelin. They got quite a few songs based on The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit.
Yeah. It's true.
Yeah. Go ahead, Luke.
I'm trying to remember. I remember now. When it comes to where you guys walk it back to how you were comparing the Harry Potter series with the Star Wars series, that's another great example of how two similar concepts or structures, the bones, I should say, you can take the skeleton of something. And two authors can take the same skeleton of something and take it in two completely different directions and create your own thing. I just find that really interesting. That's what I was going to say. But I see that Gaston has commented again, says George Lucas essentially used a template to write Star Wars. he has said how much he took from Campbell.
Yes, yes. And yes, you're right, Gaston. Like there was actually a featurette on Disney Plus called I think it was called Empire of Star Wars or Developing an Empire or something like that. And it's basically the behind the scenes of Lucas creating the original trilogy. And one of the things that George pulled out of his, like, he had a copy of it in his hand. It was like a copy that was obviously written on and notes were taken and there were sticky notes inside of it and everything. And it was the Hero's Journey, myth book, and it was by Joseph Campbell. And he was talking about just how much he used that as like a template and like a basic background for how to create Star Wars, the trilogy.
Right. All right. This has been a great show. We've gone over by about 15 minutes, but that's okay. There's really never a time limit. I mean, we can go on and on and on, and I'm sure the three of us could talk for hours.
Oh, we probably could.
Yes. Great show. Thank you, Luke, for co-hosting again with us today, being a guest. And
yeah, thanks for jumping on.
Yes, T-Paul, wonderful show. Everyone, remember, be kind, be happy, and may good things come your way. Thank you.
Have a week.
Bye. Meow.